Don't you want to try the coffee I made just for you, sweetheart? My husband James asked, offering a strange smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. I sat at my sister-in-law Nina's elegant dining table in her Nashville home, where we met for our monthly family brunch. The coffee cup in front of me gave off a weird, almost metallic odor that made my stomach churn. My name is Christina, and at 29, I never imagined I would question if my own husband was trying to poison me. But after 3 years of marriage and a string of accidental food poisoning episodes, I'd learned to stay wary, especially around Nina. She had this knack for setting up situations that left me sick or embarrassed, always wearing that same sweet, innocent smile James had just now. "That's so thoughtful of you," I said, forcing a smile, though my mind raced. The scent from the cup was unlike any coffee I'd ever smelled. It reminded me of last month, when after drinking tea at Nina's place, I landed in the ER with inexplicable symptoms. Nina, in her defense, insisted the tea was made the same way she always made it. She watched me now from across the table, absently stirring her own cup, untouched. "James has become quite the barista lately," she said, smirking. "He's been experimenting with brewing methods, just for you." The emphasis on "for you" sent a chill down my spine. I'd noticed James spending more time at Nina's house in recent weeks, claiming they were planning a surprise for our upcoming anniversary. But something felt off, the whispered conversations stopping when I entered, strange text messages I glimpsed on his phone, and now this coffee with a bizarre scent. I lifted the cup, as though preparing to sip, while watching their expressions. James and Nina exchanged a quick glance, just long enough to confirm my suspicion. Making a show of checking my phone, I stood up abruptly. "Oh, would you look at that? I need to make a quick work call." "Nina, do you mind if I use your study?" I added, leaving the table. As I passed Nina's place setting, I deliberately stumbled, switching our cups in the confusion of steadying myself. "I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, straightening. "I'm such a klutz." Nina waved off my apology with a tight smile. "Just try not to break anything in the study." I nodded and hurried away, my heart pounding. From the threshold, I could still see them at the table. Now, I just had to wait and watch. Through the study's doorway, I watched Nina lift the cup to her lips. Panic knotted my stomach. Part of me wanted to scream to stop her, to warn her. But I needed to be certain. I had spent too many nights in emergency rooms, hours doubled over in pain, always after sharing meals with them. It hadn't always been this way. When I first met James at a friend's wedding in Nashville 3 years ago, he was charming and attentive. Nina seemed welcoming too. She invited me to family gatherings and offered to help with wedding plans. But looking back now, I should have seen the red flags, how she'd accidentally spill on my dress at important events, or how my food always had extra seasoning when she cooked. The incidents started small, an upset stomach here, a mild allergy there. James always had an excuse. "Maybe it's what you ate earlier," or "you're probably coming down with something." But the pattern was clear. The worst was 2 months ago, when I ended up hospitalized after breakfast at their home. Doctors found unidentified substances in my system, but James convinced everyone it was some expired medication I must have taken by mistake. I gripped the doorframe as Nina took another sip. James was typing on his phone, acting unconcerned. My own cup sat untouched, cold, its metallic smell still in the air. Then I saw Nina's hand tremble. She dropped the cup, her face turning pale. "James," she said, voice shaking. "Something's wrong." James looked up, confusion flashing in his eyes, then horror as he realized which cup she was drinking from. He jumped up, knocking over his chair. "Nina, what's happening?" he stammered. Nina's hands were shaking violently. She tried to stand, but stumbled, grabbing the edge of the table for support. What did you put in that coffee? I stepped out of the study, my phone already recording. James was beside Nina now, his face ashen. That wasn't supposed to be your cup, he whispered. But in the silence of the dining room, his words carried clearly. Nina's eyes widened with realization and fear. Call an ambulance, she gasped, sliding to the floor. Please, I can't. I dialed 911 immediately, my hands steady despite the chaos. Emergency services? Yes, we need an ambulance at 1542 Maple Grove Drive, I said calmly, keeping my phone recording in my other hand. My sister-in-law is having a severe reaction to something in her coffee. She's conscious, but experiencing tremors. As I spoke to the dispatcher, Nina's eyes locked onto mine. The cold calculation I was used to seeing in her gaze was gone. Now, it was just raw, exposed panic. Christina, she gasped. You switched. You knew. Ma'am, the ambulance is on its way, the dispatcher said. Please stay on the line. James was growing more frantic by the second. Nina, what's happening? That wasn't supposed to... it wasn't meant for... Shut up, James, Nina snapped through gritted teeth, fury flashing through her pain. This is all your fault. You said it would just make her sick enough to miss the board meeting next week. You promised it wouldn't be traced. My blood ran cold. The board meeting. The one where I was scheduled to present my proposal for a major client account. The same account Nina had been gunning for at her competing firm. Everything snapped into focus. The tea last month? James said, we just needed to discredit you. Make clients think you were unreliable. The sound of sirens cut through the tense air outside. James stood up, backing away from us. Nina, stop talking. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Nina spat, her words slurring. We've been planning this for months, ever since Christina started outperforming me in every client meeting. You were supposed to make sure she drank it. Today. The paramedics burst through the door, and I stepped aside to let them work. As they loaded Nina onto the stretcher, I stopped the recording and immediately sent the video to my private email, then forwarded it to my lawyer. James stood frozen, watching his carefully calculated scheme crumble around him. I'll ride with her to the hospital, I told the paramedics firmly. After all, I need to make sure my sister-in-law receives the proper treatment. I met James's terrified gaze as I stepped past him. And I'm sure the doctors will be very interested in knowing exactly what was in that coffee. The emergency room at Nashville General was a flurry of movement as doctors worked to stabilize Nina. I waited outside, my phone clutched in hand, the recording playing over and over in my head. Her trembling voice, the way the panic had overtaken her composure. It was all the evidence I needed to prove I hadn't been paranoid after all. Family of Nina Anderson? A nurse called. I stood. I'm her sister-in-law. She nodded, motioning for me to follow. She's stable now, but we found some unusual compounds in her system. The doctor would like to speak with you. Dr. Phillips was waiting just outside Nina's room, tall, silver-haired, and serious. Mrs. Bennett, she said, can you tell me exactly what happened before your sister-in-law fell ill? I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. I think you should listen to this first. I hit play, and we stood in silence as the recording filled the space. Her expression shifted from professional concern to cold alarm. James's face drained of color. You went through my phone? After I found the strange vials in your desk drawer? Yes, I did. I turned to Dr. Phillips. Doctor, I've been hospitalized 3 times in the past 6 months with unexplained symptoms. I'd like to know if they match what you found in Nina's system today. The doctor's eyes narrowed. We'll need to run some tests to compare. Security will make sure your husband remains available for questioning. 2 guards appeared, positioning themselves on either side of James, his carefully constructed facade cracked. "Nina and I," he stammered. "We were just trying to help you slow down. You were working too hard, taking all the big clients. Nina said if we could just make you take some time off." "By poisoning me?" My voice was steady, even as my hands shook with rage. "How long have you been doing this? Was it you who tampered with my food at the Christmas party too?" James's silence was all the answer I needed. Behind him, through the glass window, I could see Nina lying in her hospital bed, hooked up to monitors. Her earlier bravado had vanished, replaced by the fear of someone who knew the game was over. "Detective Mendoza is on her way," Dr. Phillips said quietly. "She'll want to take statements from everyone involved." I nodded, feeling a strange, cold calm. The truth was finally surfacing. There was no going back now. Detective Mendoza arrived within the hour, her presence commanding the sterile hospital corridor. She listened intently as I played the recording from brunch and showed her the texts. "Mrs. Bennett," she said, flipping through her notes. "You mentioned previous hospitalizations. Can you tell me more about those incidents?" I opened the document I'd been quietly maintaining for months. "The first time was in February, after a dinner at Nina's house. Severe stomach pains and dizziness. The second was in April, the tea incident, and then June, after breakfast with them. Each time the symptoms were similar, but just different enough that the doctors couldn't pinpoint a cause." The detective's eyes narrowed as she scanned my log of dates, symptoms, and circumstances. "You've been keeping records since you noticed the pattern?" I hesitated before pulling out a second phone from my purse. I also started carrying a backup phone with a different number. I used it to record conversations when I was around them. I have several recordings where Nina and James discuss their plans, though they're careful not to be explicit. I tapped play. Nina's voice came through clearly. "The Henderson account is worth millions, James. We can't let her ruin everything we've worked for. Just stick to the plan. A few days of illness should be enough." James's response was equally damning. "I've got something stronger this time. She won't make it to the presentation." Detective Mendoza's expression hardened. Through the window of Nina's room, I saw my sister-in-law awake now, looking far less confident than she had at brunch. "The hospital is running full toxicology screens," the detective said. "Dr. Phillips has already identified several substances that don't occur naturally. We'll need samples from your home as well." A commotion down the hall caught our attention. James was arguing with the security guards, his voice rising in desperation. "I need to speak with my wife," he shouted, struggling against their grip. I stepped forward, my phone still recording, my voice calm and final. "You don't have a wife anymore, James. Not the one you tried to poison." "Christina, please. You don't understand. We were trying to protect you." James's voice cracked as he lunged forward, but Detective Mendoza stepped neatly between us. "Mr. Bennett," she said, her tone flat and cold, "you're not helping your case. We've already found evidence of premeditation." James laughed then, a hollow, brittle sound that echoed down the corridor. "We were just trying to slow her down. She was working herself to death, taking all the major accounts. Nina said if we could just make her take some time off." "By poisoning her?" Mendoza snapped. Her eyes were like knives. "That's not protection, Mr. Bennett. That's attempted murder." The color drained from James's face. "Murder? No, that's not. We never meant to." "Then what exactly did you mean to do?" I asked, my own voice disturbingly calm. "When you put something in my coffee this morning, James, what was supposed to happen?" His silence spoke volumes. Behind him, Nina watched through her hospital room window, her face a perfect mask of fear and calculation. I could almost see the gears turning in her mind. How to spin this, how to explain away months of systematic poisoning as some misguided act of care. Detective Mendoza's voice was brisk. "We'll need both of their phones," she told the security guards. "And I want officers posted at both doors. Nobody leaves until we have the toxicology results." Dr. Phillips entered Nina's room with a tablet in hand, her expression grim. Mendoza and I followed, leaving James outside with the guards. Nina tried to sit up straighter in the hospital bed, but her hands still trembled. "The toxicology report shows elevated levels of several substances," Dr. Phillips announced, her voice clinical. "Most concerning is a compound typically used in pharmaceutical testing. It's not something the general public should have access to." Nina's face went pale. "That's impossible. James said it was just something mild, something to cause." "Mild symptoms?" Mendoza interrupted, flipping open her notebook. "Like the ones your sister-in-law's been experiencing for the past 6 months?" The door opened again and another detective entered, holding an evidence bag. "We found these in Mr. Bennett's desk at Anderson Marketing," he said, presenting several small bottles with clinical labels, along with detailed notes about dosages and reactions. My knees went weak. "You were documenting everything," I whispered, "like some kind of experiment." "It wasn't like that," Nina protested, but her voice wavered. "We just needed to track what worked," she muttered. "The first few attempts weren't effective enough. She kept showing up to meetings anyway, so you increased the dosages," Mendoza finished for her, her eyes on the bottles. "Did you know these substances could be lethal in higher concentrations?" The room went dead silent. Through the glass window, James sat slumped in a chair, his head in his hands. "The Henderson account?" I said slowly, the pieces locking into place. "It wasn't just about that presentation, was it? The client specifically requested me as their lead. You needed me out of the way permanently." Nina's face twisted with rage and fear. "You were ruining everything. I built that client portfolio for years, and then you show up and suddenly everyone wants to work with you instead. James said he could fix it." "By killing me," I said. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. "We weren't trying to," Nina began, but Dr. Phillips cut her off. "The concentration in the coffee you drank today," the doctor said, staring directly at Nina, "was significantly higher than previous samples from Mrs. Bennett's earlier hospital visits. If she had consumed it, the outcome would have been severe, possibly fatal." Detective Mendoza turned to the other officer. "We'll need full warrants for both their homes and offices, and contact the pharmaceutical company listed on these bottles. We need to know how they obtained these substances." Nina slumped back against her pillows, the fight draining from her face. "It wasn't supposed to go this far," she whispered. "James kept saying we just needed one more try." I stepped closer to her bed, my voice steady even as my hands trembled. "Every time I got sick, every meeting I missed, every client I lost, you were both there, watching, taking notes on how your poison was affecting me. What kind of people does that make you?" Silence. Not the silence of shock, but of guilt, turning away from her, my voice calm. "I'm ready to make my formal statement now." The trial lasted 3 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime. Every day I sat in that courtroom, watching as the prosecution laid out their case with chilling precision. The evidence was overwhelming. The clinical bottles seized from James's office, the detailed notes tracking the effects of each poisoning attempt, the recordings, the texts. But what struck me most wasn't the evidence. It was their faces. Nina, once so polished and composed, looked small and frayed in the defendant's chair. James couldn't even look at me. He kept his eyes glued to the floor, as if the weight of his guilt might shatter him if he lifted his head. Dr. Phillips's testimony was the final blow. She walked the jury through the toxicology reports with the same calm authority she'd shown in the ER. The dosages had escalated over time, she explained, building toward a potentially fatal outcome. Her voice never wavered. The truth didn't need dramatics. A representative from the pharmaceutical company confirmed the source of the substances, stolen by James through a college friend working in a research lab. The defendants demonstrated a calculated, escalating pattern of behavior, the prosecutor said during closing arguments. This wasn't just professional sabotage. This was a systematic, deliberate attempt to harm Mrs. Bennett, and it nearly cost her life. When the verdict was read, I felt no joy, only relief. Both James and Nina were found guilty, on multiple counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, and unlawful possession of controlled substances, consumed by envy and entitlement. They'd sacrificed everything: their business, their reputations, their freedom, all for the illusion of destroying mine. 1 year later, I stood at the podium of the Nashville Business Leaders Conference, preparing to deliver the keynote address. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the kind of opportunity Nina had tried to keep out of my reach, the platform she thought she deserved more than me. And yet, here I was. The Henderson account, the very one they tried to sabotage, had opened doors to even greater opportunities. My client list had grown. My reputation had soared. I took a breath and began. Success isn't just about talent or hard work, I said, scanning the audience. It's about integrity, about building genuine relationships based on trust. I let the words settle. Sometimes, the biggest threats to our success don't come from competitors, but from those closest to us. But if we survive those betrayals, we don't just succeed, we rise stronger. After the speech, several young professionals came up to ask questions. One woman, her eyes bright with ambition, asked how I'd managed to stay composed through everything. I focused on what I could control, I told her. I gathered evidence, I trusted my instincts, and I refused to let fear decide the direction of my life. That evening, I received an email from the Henderson client, a 3-year contract renewal. I smiled, thinking of how close I'd come to losing everything, and how trusting my gut at that brunch had changed the course of my life. That morning, the local paper had run a small article. James Bennett and Nina Anderson begin prison sentences for attempted murder and conspiracy. I didn't read it. Instead, I focused on my newest client proposal, because the best revenge wasn't getting even. It was moving forward. It was thriving, despite the people who tried to take me down, and I was just getting started.